Pull over easy, he said quietly. Don't give him anything. Denise guided her silver Lexus onto the shoulder, her heart already pounding against her ribs. She'd been through this before. Every black woman who's ever driven in America has been through this before. But something about tonight felt different. Something felt wrong. The officer who approached her window didn't introduce himself. Didn't say why he'd stopped her. He just stood there, flashlight aimed directly into her eyes, looking past her toward Marcus like he was sizing up a problem. License and registration, he said flatly. No greeting. No explanation. The blue lights hit Denise's rearview mirror like a punch to the chest. She hadn't been speeding. She'd used her signal. Her registration was current, her insurance valid, her license clean for 31 years. But none of that seemed to matter on this empty stretch of Georgia highway at 7:45 in the evening. Her husband Marcus sat in the passenger seat, still wearing his suit from the conference they'd just left in Savannah. His hand moved slowly toward her arm. The blue lights hit Denise's rearview mirror like a punch to the chest. Denise reached carefully toward her glove compartment, narrating every movement the way her father had taught her decades ago. My registration is in the glove compartment, officer. I'm going to open it now. He didn't acknowledge her. His eyes stayed fixed on Marcus. What about you? The officer said, leaning down to look past Denise. You got identification? Marcus didn't move. I'm a passenger, officer. I'm not required to show identification. The silence that followed could have frozen water. The officer's jaw tightened. His name tag read Reynolds. His badge number was partially covered by his radio strap, and Denise noticed that immediately. Step out of the vehicle, Reynolds said. He wasn't talking to Denise. He was talking to Marcus. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone you love be forced into a situation where the rules don't apply? Where the law is standing right in front of you, wearing a uniform, and choosing to become the danger? That's exactly what Denise was watching now. Marcus hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't moved aggressively. Hadn't done a single thing wrong. But Officer Reynolds had already made up his mind about who Marcus was and what he deserved. I asked you a question, Reynolds said, his hand drifting toward his belt. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus turned to Denise. His voice stayed calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. It's okay, he said. Stay in the car. He opened the passenger door slowly, stepping out with his hands visible the entire time. Reynolds immediately grabbed his arm and shoved him toward the back of the Lexus. Hands on the trunk, Reynolds ordered. On what grounds are you detaining me? Marcus asked. Reynolds pushed him harder. I don't need grounds. I need compliance. Denise's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Every instinct told her to get out, to intervene, to demand answers. But she also knew how quickly this could escalate. How easily a concerned wife could become another headline. She watched through her side mirror as Reynolds patted Marcus down aggressively, too aggressively. He found Marcus's wallet and pulled it out without permission. Lawyer, here. Reynolds said, looking at something inside the wallet. His voice dripped with sarcasm. That's supposed to scare me? Denise's heart stuttered. Marcus's voice stayed level. It should inform you. My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm a civil rights attorney with the Southern Justice Advocacy firm. And I need you to understand something very clearly, Officer Reynolds. Reynolds laughed. Yeah? What's that? Marcus turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Reynolds's eyes. You've been on camera since the moment you approached this vehicle. The color drained from Reynolds's face. Marcus continued, his voice steady as concrete. My dashcam has full audio. It's cloud connected, meaning everything from this stop has already been uploaded to a secure server. Your decision to detain me without cause. Your failure to state the reason for this stop. Your excessive force during the pat-down. All of it. Documented. Reynolds took a step back. His hand dropped from Marcus's shoulder. I was just... You were just what? Marcus asked. Following procedure? Because I've reviewed hundreds of traffic stop cases, officer. And I promise you, nothing about this stop follows any procedure I've ever seen sanctioned by the Georgia Peace Officer standards. For the first time, Reynolds looked uncertain. He glanced toward his patrol car, then back at Marcus, then toward Denise still sitting in the driver's seat. "Look," Reynolds said, lowering his voice. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here." Marcus didn't move. "Maybe? You pulled over a vehicle with no probable cause. You demanded identification from a passenger who has no legal obligation to provide it. You physically detained me without stating a reason. And now you want to talk about wrong feet?" Denise finally stepped out of the car. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Not when she'd just watched this man try to intimidate her husband into submission, only to crumble the moment he realized there might be consequences. "Officer Reynolds," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I want your badge number. Your full badge number. And I want the reason for this stop in writing." Reynolds turned toward her, and for a split second, she saw the anger flash behind his eyes. The resentment. The fury that she, this black woman, would dare demand anything from him. But he couldn't act on it. Not anymore. "You're free to go," he muttered. "Both of you." Marcus shook his head. "We're not going anywhere until you answer her questions. Badge number. Reason for the stop. Now." What happened next proved everything Denise had always feared about traffic stops like this. Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he walked back to his patrol car, climbed inside, and sat there, watching them through his windshield. For 10 full minutes, he didn't move. Didn't call anything in. Didn't approach them again. He was waiting for them to leave so he could pretend this never happened. But Marcus had been doing this work for too long to let that slide. He pulled out his phone, called his firm's emergency line, and within 15 minutes, 2 things happened. First, another patrol car arrived, this one carrying a sergeant who clearly wasn't happy to be there on a Friday evening. Second, a local journalist who covered police accountability cases received an anonymous tip about a traffic stop on Highway 17 involving a known civil rights attorney. The situation was no longer just between them and Reynolds. It was about to become everyone's business. Sergeant Patrice Coleman stepped out of her vehicle with the posture of someone who had already heard enough. She was a black woman in her 50s, silver streaking through her cropped hair, and the look she gave Reynolds could have cut steel. "Reynolds," she said sharply. "What exactly is going on here?" Reynolds started talking fast. Too fast. He mentioned suspicious driving. Mentioned the Lexus weaving, which was a lie. Mentioned Marcus being combative, which was another lie. Sergeant Coleman listened. Then she turned to Marcus. "Mr. Listen," she said. "I know you're firm. I know your work. Tell me your side." Marcus laid it out clearly. The stop without cause. The demand for identification he wasn't legally required to provide. The physical detention. The pat-down without consent. The way Reynolds's badge number had been conveniently obscured. Coleman's expression didn't change, but Denise saw something shift in her eyes. Anger. But not at them. At Reynolds. Coleman said, turning to Denise. "I apologize for what happened here tonight. This is not how this department is supposed to operate." Reynolds started to protest. "Sarge, I was just..." "Quiet," Coleman snapped. "I'm not talking to you yet." She looked back at Denise. "Your husband has every right to file a formal complaint. Given what is described, I'd encourage it. I'll provide my card with the direct line to Internal Affairs. And I'll be writing my own report on this incident tonight." Denise felt something crack open in her chest. Relief? Validation? She wasn't even sure anymore. But for the first time in her life, she was watching a black woman in uniform stand between her family and the harm a badge could cause. It didn't erase what happened. But it mattered. Now here's where the story could have ended. Sergeant Coleman intervening. Reynolds looking humiliated. A formal complaint filed and left to work its way through a system that rarely delivers. But Marcus Ellison hadn't spent 22 years fighting injustice to settle for could have. The next morning, he filed a federal civil rights complaint. He released the dashcam footage to 3 major news outlets. And he gave an interview that aired on the evening news across Georgia, describing exactly what Officer Reynolds had done, and what Sergeant Coleman had done to correct it. Within 48 hours, the story had exploded. Reynolds was placed on administrative leave. Internal Affairs opened a full investigation, not just into this stop, but into a pattern of similar complaints that had been buried over the years. And when the investigation was complete, do you know what they found? 17 complaints. 17 different drivers, 14 of them black, who had filed complaints against Officer Reynolds over the past 6 years. Complaints about unlawful stops. Complaints about excessive force. Complaints about intimidation, false charges, and racial profiling. All of them had been dismissed. Every single one. But now, with Marcus's footage circulating and the media asking questions nobody wanted to answer, those buried complaints suddenly mattered. Suddenly had weight. Suddenly became evidence of a pattern that the department could no longer ignore. Officer Reynolds was terminated. His certification was revoked. And the department was forced to implement new body camera policies because of what one traffic stop had exposed. 2 weeks after everything settled, Denise received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman named Sandra Green. 54 years old. Lived in the next county over. Sandra had seen the news coverage. She'd recognized Reynolds's name. And she'd written to Denise to say something she'd been holding inside for 4 years. He did the same thing to me, Sandra wrote. Pulled me over for nothing. Made me stand on the side of the highway in the rain while he searched my car. Called me names I won't repeat. I filed a complaint, and they told me there was no evidence. I stopped trusting anyone in uniform after that. But watching your husband stand up to him, watching him not back down, it made me feel like maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't lying. Maybe I mattered. Denise sat at her kitchen table, holding that letter, tears streaming down her face. Because that's what this had always been about. Not just one stop. Not just one officer. But a pattern of silence. A pattern of power. A pattern of making black people feel like their experiences weren't real, weren't valid, weren't worth fighting for. Marcus had broken that pattern. And now Sandra Green was starting to believe again. Here's what I need you to understand before we close this out. Justice didn't come because the system worked. Justice came because someone with the knowledge, the tools, and the courage refused to let the system bury the truth. Marcus could have walked away that night. Could have let Reynolds write his lies in peace and call it survival. But he didn't. And because he didn't, 16 other people finally had their voices heard. So the next time you're on that road, the next time those lights flash behind you and your heart starts pounding, remember this story. Remember that your silence has power, but your voice has more. Remember that documentation is protection. That witnesses matter. That every time someone like Officer Reynolds gets away with it, he becomes bolder for the next person he stops. And remember Denise. Sitting in that driver's seat, watching her husband be shoved against their own car, knowing that the only thing standing between them and disaster was a camera and the truth. Some people will tell you the system is too big to fight. That one person can't make a difference against decades of corruption and silence. But I want you to think about Sandra Green. Think about that letter. Think about what it meant for her to finally feel believed, for years after she'd given up hope. That's what one person standing up can do. That's what refusing to back down creates. Not just justice for yourself, but justice for everyone who came before and everyone who'll come after. The question isn't whether you have the power to fight back. The question is whether you're ready to use it.